Hi, Kit. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Dave. How are you?
That's very, very good to hear. So you are the Assistant Director of Digital and Customer Services at the Royal Borough of Greenwich. What does that mean?
Well, it means I have the lucky job of overseeing all of our front door stuff. So our contact centre, our service centres, the telecare and out of hours in customer services, and then I also own all of our digital stuff as well. So digital data and technology. So yeah,
Uh,
lovely big job.
I mean, one of the interesting things, because we'll talk about this in a minute, but of course you're relatively new to local gov, aren't you? And
Yeah.
one of the fun things about local government and digital is just what actually goes into digital. So sometimes you'll find digital teams that only have two people in them and that sort of thing, and they don't even get to look after the website. So when we talk about digital for you, what's actually in that remit?
Well, I'm lucky in that I got to define my own terms, really. So I've put in that remit everything which touches technology, really. So all of the everything infrastructure-y is in there, and all of the support stuff. So application support and management is in there. Service desk, technical and cybersecurity architecture is in there. The full stack of data skills is in there. So data architecture, science, engineering, and analysis, and all of the stuff which product people would recognize as being in a product team.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the design skills, research, product management, and business analysis, and then all the website-y stuff as well.
Fantastic. So basically, all the levers you need, there's there for you to pull.
Yeah, within reason. Yeah, none of us ever have quite as much control as we want, but I do think that is a sensible definition of digital, given that we know that silos create blockers. Yeah.
Exactly. So have you had so I mean I entirely agree with you, and in Croydon, Neil and I are lucky enough that we've got the more traditional IT service as well as sort of the website bits and things, which I think is really important. Yeah, no, so completely agree on that one. Did you have much of a background with that side of things, or was that relatively new to you?
No, so I do. Most people won't know my background, I suppose. So I was 9 years in the civil service, and I did a brief stint in consultancy before coming to this role. So it's not my first CDO type role,
No.
But I've owned them all in different places. So there have been roles I've done where I've owned just the digitally bits, and there have been roles I've owned the digitally bits and the tech bits, so the infrastructure bits too. And then separately, I've done a head of data role. This is the first time where I've had the privilege of bringing all of those things together. And to me, they make total sense. You can't do data in the modern world without data is technology. It's a different flavor of technology. So there's no point siphoning that off. And the last thing I would want is a load of digital hipsters faffing with the website without fixing any of the stuff underneath. So that also wouldn't make any sense. So I do think that the future of all of this stuff is that it will be, we will achieve a greater balance between all of those three things. And there are, as you know, there are organizations where it's super trad IT, which I don't think gets us anywhere. There are other organizations which ignore that in favor of pretending it's kind of a greenfield, lovely, web development, which is also not true. And there are loads of places which ignore data. So yeah, the balance kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. That sounds like a good setup, for certain. So you mentioned, quite a big background in the civil service before coming into local gov, and this is your first local gov role. So what were some of the things that really hit you when you started working in the wonderful world of local government?
Well, a global pandemic was one of the things that hit me, Dave, which I wasn't expecting.
Well, true.
So I started in January last year. I suppose the big differences I noticed in the first couple of months were the politics is very different. So I've worked for all of the three major parties, but it was very different having politicians literally come up to your desk and just sit on the end of your desk and say, do this because it needs to be done. And I love that. I love that I can be held accountable physically in my workplace, or I could before the pandemic. So I really appreciated that. I love working where I live because, again, it's accountability and you can sort of physically touch your surroundings and you know that the things you're doing here. It makes it easy to fail, which is nice. And then the pandemic hit, and then it really bit the difference because it very singularly fell to us to allow the council to do remote working and to build some very quick services that help people get their basic needs met. So yeah, it was the silver lining of the pandemic is how much I've learned about local government very up close, very quickly, very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what would you say are some of the sort of challenges that perhaps not necessarily unique to local government, but perhaps, you know, sets it apart a little bit? Are there some of the things that,
Special flavours.
yeah,
Everyone's skin. That would be
yes,
quite a big difference.
yes,
I mean, I've worked you know, ever since 2010, when I was in the civil service, there has always been budgetary constraint, budget cuts. So I'm very used to going through those kind of financial cycles, but it's a very different power dynamic in local government, as you know, where you're waiting for your settlement from central government, and you know it's probably not going to be what you want, and you control a lot of the levers for how to bring service costs down, but not all of them. So there's a real tension between local and central government, obviously. But from a local government point of view, it's a tighter financial situation than most of the ones that I've experienced in central government, and it tends to fall on the shoulders of fewer people as well, you know, because these are smaller organisations. So I think it's felt, those financial constraints are felt more acutely. What do you think?
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, you know, because I started off as a local govie, and then I went into Whitehall for a little bit, and then came back out again. And so my heart's always been with local government to a certain extent. You know, one of the things that I really, really love about it is the fact that actually it's that very real frontline kind of, you can, you know, you literally walk past the people that you're helping as you're going into the office, when one does go into the office, of course. I think the challenges for me, again, it comes from small organisations, like you say, with a lack of money, which means that you certainly have to do more with less, in every sense of that word. So, you know, you often have to, bodge together maybe sort of technology and stuff like that you haven't had to do before. You have to beg, borrow and steal people and skills and that kind of thing, where you have to be really creative around that. I suspect, I don't know, that you know, you have to be a very good negotiator, I think, in local gov, to be able to sort to make things happen, because so much of it is dependent on goodwill and that kind of thing, to be able to get stuff through. But I think one of the benefits of that is it does create this kind of sense of community and momentum around what you're doing, that you can build up into a really sort of strong force for making things happen.
Well, actually, the CDO's network in local government is way stronger than in central government for that reason. You know, central government digital teams don't have a huge amount of interaction with each other. Sometimes for some people in some situations, yes, but we really need each other in these networks. And like, well, you know, because we're on WhatsApp groups together, for people are forever WhatsApping saying, what do you do about this service? What do you do about that? Have you subscribed to this? What do you do when you can't do this?
Yes.
And so I think the learning is richer in this environment, because, you know, it's the necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? You just have to, you have to pick and choose. And actually, another thing that I was thinking as you were talking was, in terms of beg, borrowing and stealing technology, but, you know, having to watch the pennies has really changed how I perceive digital service delivery as well. You know, we would have done 4, 6, 8 week discoveries on new services, you know, back in the day in the civil service, and we would have thought that was normal, and we were very purist about it.
Yeah.
There's no, as you know, there is no purist attitude to be had here. We can't afford that. So how do you make sure that the work you're doing is evidence driven and user led, while not going through those protracted, like, you know, discovery and research cycles? Because you need to do user research, so you still need to do it. You need to do it in very different ways, though, and I think it encourages earlier prototyping and earlier. Well, I think that's the optimist in me. I think it encourages, you know, really strong pragmatism. That is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right about the pragmatism point. And a big part of pragmatism is knowing which battles to fight, isn't it? I think, and I do think that actually one of the other big things that one needs to be able to do these sorts of roles in local gov is that compromise thing, and knowing when to compromise and which things to, you know, stand your ground on and which not to. And it's interesting because, you know, we hired a few people in, because obviously the journey in Croydon started, you know, a year or two but before yours at Greenwich, and you know, we did a fair bit of recruitment, bringing in skills, and we'll talk about this in a bit, I think, in more detail, but like, you know, that never existed in local government before, you know, and we are a few years behind Whitehall on this. Things like product managers and user researchers and all that kind of stuff, delivery managers. And what we found is that when we brought a lot of, some of the folk came in and it was just absolutely perfect, you know, they took to it and it was absolutely great. Others perhaps was slightly more of that purist mindset, and they were a little bit like looking around themselves thinking, you know, what the hell is this? Do you know what I mean? Because we got people here saying we need this thing done tomorrow, and you know, it's just got to happen, and all that kind of thing, and they really struggled with it. So that ability to be able to compromise, I think, is so important.
Yeah, it's a real humbling experience, technology in local government, and you have to approach it with humility, because you won't get what you want in most situations. You won't get purely what you want. And your whole point as a digital professional in local government is to find out how to get to the right outcome without all of the structures and the self-limiting constraints that all the necessities that you've built up in your head of how to do digital.
Yeah.
To strip them all back and then build up the real bare minimum, but absolutely without compromising service quality. That's the thing. So it's not a sum that you can add up in your head. It's not like a nice, neat equation, but it's something to do with, well, for people like us, it's to do with hiring, right? So that people see that they're not coming into some, like sexy, siloed startup where they can do what they like, but that we need to, that the skills, say you come in as an interaction designer, we need to make sure that we use those skills and do design the cleanest, lightest possible services, but that you might have an existing old system that you have to, what if you have to iterate the design of that? What if you have to work with a supplier to do that? What if you're dual running? What if the thing that you want isn't going to happen for 6 months? All these things are kind of real decisions. And there's no point, hiring pragmatists, or maybe hiring enough of a balance of pragmatists with some idealists. Maybe that's the key. But yeah, there's no point coming in and thinking that things are going to be super clean. No, I would say
definitely not.
There's nothing clean. Nothing's clean.
So when you started, as you said, January 2020, it must have seemed like such a marvelous opportunity opening up in front of you of all this plenty of time to be able to plan what you wanted to do, and I'm sure you had some ideas. So obviously a couple of months before the pandemic hit, you started in the role. What at that point, what were your top priorities when you were coming into the job? What were the things you really wanted to get to grips with, not knowing what was to come?
Well, I gave myself a month to understand the sector a bit better. Build some relationships, understand context. So that I wasn't shooting my mouth off, basically. So I gave myself a month to meet loads of people and do a lot of learning and listening. The team at the time weren't particularly well protected. They hadn't been particularly well protected by previous versions of me. Well, they hadn't been exactly a previous version of me, but interim leadership had not particularly protected them. So building up trust with them. And then what I figured would happen was that, because I had this beautiful privilege of saying, what is the role? You make it what you want to be. What does an assistant director for digital do? Yeah. And so I just started defining my terms, and I figured I'd pretty quickly move to some kind of simple strategy. And then I would start, then there's investments, and then there's hiring, and then we crack on. And those things did indeed happen. And the mission is still what it always was. But with the pandemic coming in, it was sort of week 8, I think it was.
Yeah.
All of the strategic stuff got pushed back by a quarter. We spent 3 months just doing how on earth do we get 4,000 people to be able to work remotely.
Yep.
When we didn't have a functioning VPN before we started, not a really scaled one.
Yeah.
And how do we continue to offer critical services? So it's broadly speaking, there's still the same journey, but slower, more humble, and far better informed by, as I've said, this kind of pragmatic, what's the least we can do to get value to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So let's talk about the pandemic a bit and what the response looked like from Greenwich. What were the things you mentioned? First of all, obviously the first thing was pretty much overnight, it was a case of no one's coming into the office anymore. Can the computer still work, please? How did that
go? Fine. We bought a shed load of laptops, which I'm sure loads of authorities did. So right. get many laptops so there were easy bits, buy technology. So we bought phones, we bought laptops.
So was not the bulk of the estate on laptops then at that?
Nope. No.
Right, okay.
So it was, I would say Greenwich was a pre-transformation council. So it was very physical, Yeah, there weren't laptops were not a thing. Not really.
Not
So not a thing. So we bought laptops, we bought phones and tablets and stuff. That was one kind of stream of it. Another stream of it was giving access to the still physically deployed back office systems, so VPN stuff.
Yep.
Third strand was making sure our customer service provision could be done, could be continued. So we had to shut down physical services. So moving those services to other channels. That was one bit. And then there was that was the kind of corporate end of things, making sure the council could still run. And then the resident facing side of things was using our existing CMS to spin up some very quick sort of form driven services so that people could book a COVID test, get in contact with our community teams to get food and medicines, and sort of keeping in touch stuff, social stuff. And so we were kind of, they were the main strands of it. And it was on any given day, it was balancing out very finite, time to those different priorities, really.
Yeah. Oh,
and it is.
So how long did it take, would you say? Sorry. How long did it take, do you think, before we had those pretty much 4,000 people working as well as they can?
I'd say by April. March was rough.
Yeah.
March was really rough. By April, I distinctly remember a day in April last year where we had stand up. We have stand up at the same time every day. And for a start, for the first time, my kind of senior team weren't sounding quite as panicked. It wasn't quite as, well, you'll know this as well, but nobody was working proper hours at that point. It was crazy hours all the time. And suddenly people were starting to work something that more closely resembled a normal working week. And we took a little breath then. And then it was June really before it got to be a bit more sensible and people booked, bits of summer leave and stuff. But it was a solid quarter of graft. And for those of us who were also, homeschooling and it was character building is what it was. It was character building.
Yes. Did you learn any, and did perhaps not necessarily for yourself, but maybe focus on the team? Were there some opportunities there to learn some lessons? Because I think one of the big ones for us, we were really lucky in Croydon. Everybody already had a laptop. We had a thing called Microsoft Direct Access set up, which did most of the VPNing reasonably well. Our big fear was theoretically it should have covered the entire estate, but we'd never tried it. So, God only knows. And luckily it worked out fine. But the thing that we did do was we implemented most of Office 365 in the traditional local government sense, which is the email switched over. But that was more or less it. But we'd got this plan that we'd had for some time to spend 12 months rolling Teams out to everyone. And it turns out you can do, and we had like this year-long staggered kind of thing. Turns out you can do it in 24 hours and it's fine.
Switch it on and let it run.
If you build it, they will come. It turns out sometimes, so if the conditions are right. So that was one of our big learnings. That actually, again, it's almost that compromise thing. Sometimes switch it on, chuck it over. People make the best of it. Sometimes. Knowing what those times are.
That's a pragmatism in its extreme, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah. So were there any things, do you think, that the team learned, or that you're able to maybe to get a little bit more sort of digital age thinking going in terms of like rapidity of working or
well, iterative deployments became the thing. Not that we were doing any big bang stuff before then really, but I didn't have time to assert any influence about how we did anything before the pandemic hit. We were just getting ourselves up and running as a team. But that idea of, I suppose from the resident facing point of view, even a simple web form, the fact that you do that in a couple of days or 3 days, get it out there and then get the feedback in, I'm not sure that the team would have had the confidence to do that before. And I don't like the phrase MVP, but something that you're fairly sure will add value, getting out there early. That is, that's been one silver lining. And then corporately, the same thing, as you say, we did the same thing with Teams. And we learned that you can do it iteratively. And I think we all also learned that you only get part of the benefit unless you back it up with some guidance, some trust building. And people trusting technology that's been a real journey for this council over the last 12 months. People just didn't really trust, the IT, and it was a zone of fear for people, and it's still some of those tools and platforms still are in some ways, but we've come on leaps and bounds through necessity. Not worth it, obviously, given how much the pandemic has ravaged the country, but you take benefits where you can get them.
No, absolutely right, absolutely right. So all of that then must have obviously delayed, like you said, the things that you wanted to do around, producing the strategy and shaping the team to how it would look. How did you go about putting the strategy together? Did you have, presumably you came into it with some idea of what you wanted to put down?
Well, I mean, I woke up in June after this 3 months of work and suddenly went, oh my God, I haven't actually said what I think the long-term future of the digital in this council should be. I should probably get on that. So there was a sense of my own sense of innate impatience with myself, which is, that has fueled my whole career. So that felt like the right time to start. In terms of what I said in that strategy, I find it mundane in the nicest possible way. I don't think I've said anything that isn't pretty much, there's nothing controversial in there. There's absolutely nothing original in that strategy whatsoever. As you'll have seen if you've read it, nothing is new or particularly radical or different. And I like it that way because I don't like show off technology. But what I do like, I wanted a strategy that would fail, that could fail, sorry, not that would fail. I wanted a strategy that we could fail against. So something that's specific enough that we could fail to deliver it and that we could be held accountable for it. So I don't know, so just to make a confession in a sort of, I don't think it's really a confession type way. I have the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy on my shelf, and I have not read it. So I'm not even convinced that the thing I've written is a strategy. But what I do know is it does give a clear vision for where we want to go. It's qualitative, so it's got a narrative about the kind of impact we want to have on people's lives. And it's got some lists of stuff.
Yeah.
Where in the list doesn't appear, you can ask us why it hasn't appeared, and we can tell you what we've prioritized instead. And that, sorry, this is more the how than the what. And I'll do the what. Because I think very ably at extremes. I'm very good at big picture thinking, and I'm very good at specific bits of lists and accountability. And I don't really like planning in the middle because I don't find it helpful. So that's why the strategy looks like that. Yeah. And then the what is, it was just, I really do think it's common sense. You obviously, if you're the CDO of a council that does not have mature digital services for residents, you're going to want to build them.
Yeah.
The second work stream, which is the same thing for staff.
Yeah.
I'm personally very passionate about that, but I don't think you can build great resident services without mirroring that practice internally. The third work stream is data, which is really, that's such a junior partner in the world of digital at the moment. I don't really get why it's so important. So I wanted to be explicit about that. The next work stream is about infrastructure. Well, I mean, if you're in a largely physically hosted council and you want to get out to the cloud, you're going to need to state your intent. And then the fifth work stream is about capability. Well, we couldn't do any of the first four without people. And then the sixth one is what we do in the borough to help people with, connectivity and some other, some other kind of wider sort of economic growth stuff in there. And that, to me, it's sort of for itself, because yep. What else would you say? They're just the first basics that we would do. And I wanted to write down the basics because I think too often people skip over them and start to write things down about the blockchain. And I just think it's silly.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, particularly on the strategy writing thing, again, you often see people on Twitter and stuff saying, well, this isn't a strategy and that's not a strategy. And to be honest, I never really understand what they mean. It's a bit like the difference between objectives and goals and things like that. I've never really understood that. I tend to think that the strategy is whatever the context requires in a piece of paper in order to get the thing done that you need to get done. So it could look like anything. It's just entirely dependent on your local surroundings, really, at the time. And you're right.
Yeah.
You say there's nothing new in there, and there might not be anything new to the cadre of CDOs around the country, but presumably it was new to the staff in Greenwich, and it was new to some of your colleagues as well. How well did it land with those folks? Did they see it as being this is exciting and stuff?
Yeah, people get it. The reason it's liked internally is because it doesn't attempt to hoodwink anyone.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mention anything sexy at all. It's written in plain English in a way that anybody can sign up to.
Yeah.
We have a very good chief exec, and she understands it thoroughly and champions it. So it's not that people don't care what we do, but everyone in the council, as you know, is extraordinarily busy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very mission-driven culture, and they've got their own missions, be it social care or affordable housing. Oh my God, it could be anything.
Yes.
But I don't want to distract them from their mission with my mission. The thing that have been employed to do should help them do the thing they want to do, but it shouldn't befuddle them while we're on that journey together. So I think the appeal internally is that it reduces the kind of cognitive friction needed to understand where we're going. It's just like, we're going to do these 6 things within thing 1. There are 10 things we're going to do this year. And it's just kind of, it's designed to be simple and helpful. And I do think it is helpful.
Good.
No, and then the other thing I want to say on the strategy front is I think that quite a few people have contacted me since writing that, since we published it, and said, how did you go about writing it and all of that sort of stuff. And I think 5 years ago, earlier in my career, I don't think I'd have had the confidence to write something that was so boldly plain and so mundane, as I call it. And that is something I'd encourage other people to do as well if they're writing a strategy. I'm not saying don't read the book. Maybe read the books, but I think you need to sound like yourself, because if you're the one that's going to lead people through it, if I'd have added in a load of gumph that didn't sound like me, I think people would have sniffed it out, and I don't think it would have sounded so authentic.
No, interesting. No, really good point. If we sort of zero in on the sort of the theme there that's around around the resident services, I think there's loads and loads in there, isn't there, that we can unpack. Without, obviously, I know you won't want to disparage what went on before you, but what did you inherit in terms of like the resident service offer, both on the tech side and on the sort of the user-centered design kind of sense side of it?
Well, on design, I didn't inherit anything. It hadn't been a factor that was considered before. In terms of technology, I inherited a kind of forms engine, which we still use now. It's not bad technology, although I think will evolve. And that was it. It's forms driven, and you can get. I think there is a debate to be had in local government digital about what's the difference between a form and a service, because it's something I think about a lot. So I think the difference between the current approach and my preferred approach isn't that we do forms. I'm not against them. And there are, people like Caroline Jarrett who are experts in it will tell you that there is so much value to be derived from a good form. Mm-hmm. So I think the difference between where we are and where I want to be isn't forms versus no forms, but it's don't stop at the form. What about service design? And you're right to mention user-centered design in terms of interaction design as well, although it's not just limited to that. But interaction design in a world where you're running off a forms engine, where the fields are at least partially derived for you and you don't have full influence on that makes me uncomfortable. And that is probably something that I won't compromise on over time, because you get into things like accessibility and stuff, which are, I really am passionate about those things. Yeah. But it's certainly a grey and nuanced world, and it's not something where I feel like those of us who've had experience working with, for example, the GDS design system and believe in it. I don't want those kind of people to ride in on their chargers and say no more forms or anything like that. But I do think that there's a quite mature debate to be had about how you grow from a kind of form-based psychology to a service-based psychology when you're, what I inherited was that it was forms, and it was forms done by very few people in a corner as well. And that's the other big difference.
Yes, exactly, in their own silo.
Yeah.
A lot of other stuff. I think there's something else here about the context and some of the constraints of local councils, which makes it more difficult as well, which is the fact that, it'd be good to get your take on this. My genuine view is that councils are insane organisations in a, have no right to exist, to have a single organization that does all these, you know, that does planning and runs schools and runs care homes and picks up dog poo. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. And sometimes I do think, and you know, Neil and I have chatted about this a fair bit, sometimes you do think it makes no sense to have one technology or digital function that would serve all those different businesses and try and, you know, using that sort of dream of that sort of Lego idea, you know, of reusing the same components for social care and for, I don't know, building control. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, does it? So,
well,
you know, and then the sort of technology element of that is the fact that you've then got all these line of business systems which exist, which are of, let's say, variable quality. And each of them sometimes will have their own resident facing bit. And it's just like, where do you start and what do you do? What's your thoughts on some of that stuff?
well, I dare say that you and I aren't too divergent on that. So, oh crikey, yeah, councils in a way mimic mini government departments. You know, one of my questions coming into local government was, why do these people not know each other? You know, the silos are so tightly set. You know, maybe social workers won't talk to housing people like ever in their whole careers. You know, they just exist entirely in their own bubble. And I very quickly realized how stupid I was, because, well, of course they do, because they have a ridiculously intense job to do. Why on earth would they? And in that way, it reminds me of a load of mini Whitehalls. You know, when I was in the Ministry of Justice, I wasn't off talking to the Department for Transport every day. Well, why would I do that? I've got my own job to do. So that bit makes sense to me. Albeit, I do think that new corporate services like digital do have a responsibility to make some connections between, because where reusability is concerned, that's important. To what degree you can share technology components, I mean, crikey. I think there's stuff to be had at the infrastructure level. There's a load of stuff to be had at the corporate tool level, loads and loads of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think it gets super shady. So I think that these systems are incredibly specialist, many of them statutorily driven. I don't perceive that there's going to be a huge amount of opportunity there. And the next bit of your question, line of business systems, well, I think the really big question for us all as CDOs for that is, and CTOs, is how do we disrupt the current marketplace without becoming a load of people who say disruptive all the time?
Yes.
So by disrupt, I mean, how do we radically improve the user experience of our staff and residents using proprietary line of business systems that are currently strangled by relatively few suppliers, none of whom, to my awareness, seem to employ any designers to make their services, you know, more and more usable. And that question then can be broken down into components, can't it? Because I agree with you, the resident portal of any line of business system makes me, you know, homicidal. You know, I just think they are almost universally terrible.
Yeah.
But if we're going to take control of that, then we need to work closely with that supplier. We need to think about APIs. That is painful. We need to think, well, I mean, anything in the world of two-way integration brings up security concerns, and it brings in passive resistance and all that kind of stuff. And then the really big question is, how might we all, as local authorities, pool our funding and our people, or maybe hire some new people to build publicly shared assets, so we forever have a choice? Because at the moment, the choice is between 3 suppliers normally for these big systems. None of us like working with any of those suppliers, in my experience. Those suppliers are not going to shift their products to be miraculously amazing. So how do we take back? I'm very interested in power dynamics. How do we take back power in the market?
Yep.
And the only way I can think is by all sticking in some cash, having a team, or probably 2 or 3 product teams, working to build those systems out ourselves so that they become publicly shared.
Absolutely. And in many ways it sounds so simple, doesn't it? But and of course the real challenge, I suspect, with that will be convincing. Say, let's take revenues and benefits as an example. You know, really is a classic 3 supplier setup there. Nobody is incentivized to improve anything And in a sense, I almost, not much, but a little bit of sympathy almost with the vendors on this side, or at least perhaps some of the individuals that work for those vendors, maybe, that perhaps, you know, some of those developers that are there that would actually quite like to make their products a little bit better, that actually the way the market is set up, they're just not incentivized to invest any money in doing that.
No.
They won't make any
No,
mistakes.
I mean, I would have a little bit of sympathy with them if I didn't know that they were making 55 to 6% margin on their day rates, and they're selling that back to the public sector over and over again.
True.
If, you know, it's not that I'm completely single-minded about this problem, but I would say sympathy would be stretching it from my point of view.
Maybe yes. After just a couple more years, the Stockholm syndrome is taking slightly having more of an impact on me. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
But you know, say with Revs and Bens, it would be convincing that service, or those services, if we're talking across a number of councils, to take on, you know, I mean, that cost of change for those folk to take out a system, put one in. You can imagine that many of them just saying, "Over my dead body, are you doing this to my service?"
Yes, and ours aren't actually, because our Revs and Bens team are amazing people. But I do think that it's a 5 or 6 year horizon. So I think that none of those service teams at the moment I don't think we should trouble ourselves to convince anybody at the moment. What we need to do is, I think it would be a year, just putting myself out there, I think it would be a year to get some investments agreements from different local authorities, find a home for this team. Then there would be, you know, there'd be MOUs and all of that sort of stuff. You'd hire the people in, and then it would probably be 2 years, let's call it a year from then, that team would have built something that might be publicly consumable. And only then was it really, so, you know, this is not, it is for the long term, this, you know, and we'd have to dig in for that many years, I think, to make it a viable idea. And it would cost millions of pounds to get it to viability as well, you know. So no single local authority is ever going to do it. And some, you know, places like MHCLG are very good and are probably willing to help, but of course they're not going to pay for the whole thing. No. So that, you know, it's a side project for us all.
The 20% maybe, yeah. Right. But no, I mean, as I say, you know, it is something that's been spoken about, you know, for some time. And I think you're right. It probably just needs the few people to be bold and a little bit brave, maybe, and just to push that forward. One of the other areas in the strategy, which you've mentioned a couple of times, is data and stuff, and how that does seem to be, you know, the forgotten child to a certain extent around a lot of this. And I'd agree with you. You know, we haven't managed to do in Croydon much around this space. There's a separate team from CDS actually, which does some of the Power BI stuff and all that kind of thing, you know, which it looks very impressive. But they're still having, I think, to process a lot of data out of spreadsheets exported from those line of business systems again, causing difficulties. And I know that we're a long way from having that kind of data-driven culture where we're sort of making decisions based upon what the analytics are kind of telling us. What are your thoughts on, you know, how can we start to build up that data culture and because I think that the danger is that we could invest a lot on the technology side and on the design side, but nobody's going to use it. So the two really need to go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah, and I think my perspective on this would be really different if I had the last bit of my civil service career working at Department for Work and Pensions. I was working on data, and that it completely revolutionised how I think about this. So I suppose not that I have revolutionary thoughts; it's just, you know, it's relatively recent, this kind of stream of my ambition. So I think there's no singular answer to that, but I think the few things that we all need to do, I think hiring a couple of data specialists is a really good thing, with the emphasis on people who want to get their hands dirty. So my approach to this is I'm going to hire quite a few data engineers, with the explicit intent of improving access to our systems data, building environments where we can combine and analyze data in the cloud easily. And to go with those people, I will assemble some product skills to start getting into that design stuff. I think one pitfall, so a mistake I made the last time I tried to do this was focus too much on visualization, exactly what you've just said. And I think I assumed that if I applied my own design passion to the world of data, that it would miraculously work. It doesn't work at all. And the reason it didn't work is because people think they know how they run their business. So my ambitions have changed. I think I was fairly, I think I was arrogant, really. I wouldn't have seen myself like it at the time, but I think I was arrogant to assume that if I gave people a wealth of data about their own business, that they would change how they work.
Yep.
So I don't think that's going to be my emphasis now. I think the way we'll do it is hire those great people in, and then just work really closely with those lines of business. Say, what do you not know? You know, what do you, I think I'll just be way more demand led about it. So that's that bit of it. And then I think the other thing we're definitely going to do is sort of data mastering, so specific work streams to improve data quality. Things like purging data, and working on metadata and tagging, data auditing. You know, I really think that we can't do anything without having done those basic things. So what I anticipate coming out with after, say, 9 to 12 months of these people being in, and we're just about to start hiring them, is some really nice data pipelines, right, some nice extract processes, you know, some batch stuff out of systems, maybe some nice streams, landing in a way that is easily auditable. None of that is yet adding much value to businesses, but I've tried to do it the other way around, where you have kind of data exemplar stuff. And in my experience, it, you know, as you suggested, it didn't particularly work. And then just the only other thing I would say about that is there are already analytical type people working within these lines of business. You know, they quite often will have BI teams or performance teams. And I think having those in the family of data people is going to be so important, because they tend to be very, like things like Excel wizards. You know, very few of them are like SQL devs. Yeah. But the what they can do through Excel and the insight they bring to the service, which they also know very well, means that they're going to be the future of all of this. And the kind of people that I hire will just augment that and like push it into Python, or it'll, you know, we'll be doing some nice tooling on AWS or whatever it is. It will just apply a new technology lens to stuff that they're already doing really well themselves.
Interesting. And you know, in some of the conversations you've been having with some of the services and things within the council, are there any sort of clear problems that you've come across which could really benefit from some of this kind of data work?
Yeah, I think a repeated one. I mean, services know how to be outcome driven about their own service, and there's a lack of outcome awareness in data at the moment. So, sorry, that sounded like I was contradicting myself. Services know what they want from their service. They don't know how to be outcome driven with the data they want. So it tends to be that they know what they want from their service, but what they ask for is shed loads of reports. So the most common pattern, which I hope we'll be working on in the coming year, is when we do this, what's the effect? So, for example, in social care, if we recommend this intervention or that intervention, how much does it cost and what's the impact on our customer? So that I think that kind of impact work is going to be quite important, because you can see it, you know, you can see it particularly in housing. You know, when we leave a unit empty for this long, what's the impact on availability down the line? And there's loads of examples of that. So I sense that linking this kind of wealth of data to outcomes, yeah, I reckon that'll be quite popular, I think.
Yes, certainly would. I think. So leaping on to just another theme, probably last, not saying that the others aren't important, but just these are the I'm interested in particularly. So the capability one is something that I'm absolutely fascinated with and slightly obsessed about. So you know, because there's two elements to this, I think. One is obviously it's the capability and the skills that are needed by the core digital service to be able to do good digital work. And we mentioned earlier just some of the small number of additional roles and competencies that are required within a council, many of which are completely alien and new. And actually, one of the things that I noticed in Croydon is once you start bringing some of these people in, the transformation in terms of, you know, some of the scales falling from people's eyes, or just, you know, the speed at which you're able to work when that happens is absolutely terrific. Then the other side of it is working with the entire rest of the organization in terms of, just getting them to, when we say that word digital, this is what we mean when we say that. Do you know what I mean? And this is what your role in this is, and understanding all of that. So on that first point, what are the most important skills do you think that need to be in that digital? I mean, obviously all of them, but
all of them now.
All of them now, straight away.
Yeah.
Do you have an order of, when you're sort of recruiting people in, is there an order of preference? Let's get the product people in first, and then we'll do the delivery managers or user. I'm always tempted. I sometimes think user researchers, get them in first, because that's one of the most culture changing kind of things you can do. But what's your take?
Yeah, I don't have a strict hierarchy, and I do vary it service by service. So this is a very live issue for me at the moment, because I'm hiring 4 heads of service at the moment. And then I really thought, well, how on earth, because we're going to hire a lot of people, how on earth do I hire the rest? Do I just hire top down? Absolutely not. Do I hire the top level and then bottom up? Also weird and not particularly helpful. So the way that I'm going to do it is, after I've hired these 4 heads of service, we're then going to be service driven. So we're going to attempt to meet latent demand. And that will mean a real different blend of skills service by service. So, and to give a few cases, at the moment, there's a real big demand for a kind of a data heavy product team in social care. So that will definitely involve product management and some user research and design, but it'll be very data engineering heavy. In another one of our services, it's a pure service design kind of problem, and more kind of discovery flavored. So I feel very, I really want to be led by real life problems that are solvable. Having said that, so if we were going to go skill by skill, some common features, I think, are service design. So people who can look strategically over your service and think about process re-engineering, and about the interaction between virtual and physical design, and about how your strategy might be contributing or taking away from user outcomes. That kind of feel of skills, I think, is going to be really important. As I said, I keep talking about data engineering. I think that's going to be really important. Yeah. And then, excuse me, it's not a single job, but product thinking. So let's call it product management if we're going to do a singular skill. The ability to see what we'll be needing product managers to do is to look at the existing service, which will be paper and telephony based, process based, and manual, and say, what is the world of technology inside the service, and what does that look like? So I think it's going to be very individualized and tailored, but I think they're going to be commonly needed skills.
Yeah. No, absolutely, for sure. And in terms of that thing around, if you like, people sometimes talk about digital maturity and things like that in terms of the organization. Have you got some thoughts on how you can tackle that? So, how do you talk to the people perhaps at the top of the organization? What can be done at scale with a larger group of people around that to, just to raise their awareness, if nothing else, about, what the hell we're talking about?
Yeah. I don't have any great insights on it. I'm trying not to think about digital maturity, because I feel like it's too simplistic a framework, and I don't think I'd necessarily know it until we've done it. How we talk to very senior. Well, I suppose I'm senior enough in the organisation that I'm effectively talking to my peers. Yeah. So I suppose getting digital high enough up the organisation that you have that, for the people who are hierarchical, they have a reason to listen. Always helps. And that's so that kind of invested power. And then I think the rest of it is all to do with hiring humble people, I think. So not hiring for purists, although within their own discipline they can be purist in their desires, they need to know that the manifestation of that is not going to be pure. So hiring the right shape of person. And then I do think language is very important. So deriving a common language, so using enough of the language of the people who are not in your discipline, so understanding how social workers talk to each other, what they value, and empathy through language, the language of active listening and repeating back what people have said to you is going to be very important. And then dropping your own professional language in there as well, in an attempt to build bridges. I think that's going to be really important too. And then also just not sitting around in your own little cubby hole, our council is not rich as no councils are, so being very clear about how what we're doing will save money, you know, is also extremely important. And there's no reason why, you know, I do feel duty bound to help the place balance the books, and, you know, taking on that responsibility and sitting there with your CFO, or, you know, that's very important too, and taking on their worries with yours.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, obviously we know all about that in Croydon as well. But yeah, indeed. So I mean, one thing I want to pick up on before we sort of close up is a lot of the ways in which in the past and still now councils, you know, they write their strategy that will cover 3 or 4 years usually, if they're sensible, and then oftentimes there'll be some kind of program that underpins that and is the implementation of that strategy, and sometimes those programs of course go hand in hand with the funding mechanism, because you know, a lot of the time transformation is funded through capital funding, and that's time limited, and therefore you need to know what happens when, and it's got to finish at some point. Obviously the mantra from GDS and other quarters was that we build teams, not projects, and all that kind of stuff. How are you balancing that? Because it's such a difficult one to do. I think in terms of, you know, we want to build a core service that just exists to do digital stuff, and yet funding hard. What's your approach on that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, I say lucky GDS, and although I agree with almost everything that GDS has ever said, we don't have the luxury of applying it in a pure way, so there's no point worrying too much about funding teams, not projects. Having said that, I don't intend to programmatize this particularly, because it's a forever job, but the capital envelope is finite. It's a 4-year capital envelope. I've been rigorous about costing the balance between capital and resource, so we've been all the way through the VAT implications of it, and we have a sort of to the penny costing, which is terrifying, obviously. However, the money is not going to fall off a cliff at the end of the 4 years. So we've gone through, our accounting teams are amazing, and together I and them have gone through and costed the uplift. So I've had to do 2 things. There's no digital team, so I've got to pay for that digital team, and that digital team will run in perpetuity. So that's effectively BAU, but it's not BAU because they're going to be working on transformative stuff. So we've been through that. And then there's an uplift because we have to invest in things that are finite. So for example, building out cloud infrastructure, there'll be a big burst of energy, and then that energy will diminish. So my approach to that, it's very unusual for me, but I've been incredibly rigorous about the money on this, so every penny is accounted for. How we make that less terrifying is the roadmap is shiftable, as all good agile practices. So that I will at no point say that we are going to do everything in that strategy. We will not do everything in that strategy. But what I wanted was to get a really good idea out to our residents who are accountable to for what we're going to aim for, basically. So but it won't be governed as a single program, because it's like trying to, I don't know, I won't draw the analogy. It would be bonkers to make it a single program. It makes it sound like the program could pass or fail. So that's not true at all. What we're going to do is case by case look at, we call them initiatives. So initiative could be a product, it could be a discovery exercise, it could be a project in the traditional sense of, you know, a hardware deployment or something. But, you know, that word initiative is just, you know, that means I don't have to define exactly what it is, and we don't create false silos between types of activity. But each one of those can be costed, and it will add up to that capital envelope. And I know it will, because we'll drop the ones off the end that we can't afford. So that's the approach I've taken. The money is finite, and that's important because of our medium-term financial strategy. It's important that the money be finite. The uplift is finite. The time that the really big bulk on the rump on top of the BAU budget is also finite, but the scope is flexible.
Interesting. And have you any sort of savings objectives or anything associated with any of that stuff? You have, right?
Yeah, so it's expected to broadly speaking pay for itself.
Right.
So the idea is that I haven't promised that our technology estate is suddenly going to be cheap to run or anything silly like that. But over time, we should, broadly speaking, make savings that will pay for the uplift in the investment. And I think that's realistic. I think I haven't said anything that I don't think that we can deliver.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
we'll see.
We'll see.
See.
Yeah, exactly. It certainly will be interesting to find out. So you're currently hiring for your heads of service, and at the time of recording, I think people have got a week left to apply for those, haven't they? So
They do.
get your applications in, everybody. But what, apart from sort of that hiring element, what's the what's the things that's on your agenda now for the next 6 weeks or so?
Yeah, well, 6 weeks is a great timescale because our roadmap, the clock officially starts ticking on the 1st of April.
Right.
Nobody asked me to do that, but it's good psychology to give people like a start line. And obviously, I'm kind of 15 months into the job by that point, so you could say that the roadmap started before. We've done a bunch of stuff, but I wanted something that feels clean in a world of non-clean delivery. So the next 6 weeks are going to be continued road mapping across the organisation, and we've got some individual roadmaps for different directorates and stuff. So firming those up and doing good kind of governance on those. Last bits of stuff on finalising that investment, the detail of that investment plan. And then by the 1st of April, we might have our first new hire coming in through the door. Maybe I won't mind too much if we don't.
No.
But those things need to happen, broadly speaking, in parallel, so that those new heads can own that roadmap. Absolutely. But yes, it's going to be a busy, and I think I'm going to have a week off at some point because it'll probably be a busy April to July. I think is going to be quite hefty.
I would imagine so, and probably like an awful lot of other people, sort of in the current situation, you've probably got a lot of leave to take as well. So
it's all banked up, and I'll carry a bit over. But when you're a parent, your leave gets nibbled away with bits of inset days, doesn't it? So
that is true.
I don't carry over weeks and weeks, but just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Fantastic. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time for having a chat. And I think there's loads there that lots of people will be able to sort of learn from and stuff. So if anyone wanted to get in touch with you to pick your brains a little bit about any of the stuff we've been talking about, what's the best way of getting hold of you?
Twitter is a very good way of getting hold of me. So if they're on Twitter, I'm at Kitterati, KITTERATI. On Twitter, and my DMs are open, so they can direct message me whenever they like. That
sounds good, and it stops the corporate inbox from getting too cluttered. So that's a very good shout. So yeah, thanks again, Kit. That's been absolutely brilliant, and we'll maybe check in again at some point to see how. Yeah, that'd be lovely. It's been really useful for me to reflect on things and to hear what you're doing as well. So fantastic. Well, anytime you'll be able to watch this video back to find out what you think about things, which will be nice. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Speak to you soon. See you later. Bye.